I'm going to come here more often. People are incredibly gracious. Especially thank you, David, for your kind words. So when I had the opportunity to come down here, it was either this or keep pushing our budgets through, and this was much more appealing to me. So thank you, Eric. Thank you to President Aldrich, your staff, Greg, everyone, for being here. It's an honor and a pleasure. One of the interesting things about going from a contemporary art museum in Boston, which the ICA, where I had previously worked, is all about cutting-edge contemporary art. I was there for 7 years and went to Provincetown to rebuild the museum. And most people said, why would you leave the ICA to go to Provincetown? I said, well, have you ever been to Provincetown? That was one of my first questions. And to be able to spearhead a major renovation and build the first screen art museum in the country was a huge coup for me and a joy. Having said that, I'm in my 10.5 years there. I haven't left yet because I'm still enjoying myself. And one of the first objects that I saw in our permanent collection was this piece here called the Model Stand. We have about 3,000 objects in our collection at PAM, American artists from about 1899 to the present. And we have a significant collection of Herman Marils. And that was one of the first pieces that I had ever seen, completely attracted to. So if I were to steal one piece from Pam, it might be that one. But I said might, and because this is being taped. I had the pleasure of meeting Esta Maril pretty much upon my arrival on the shores of Provincetown. For those of you who knew Esta, she was a straight shooter. She told you exactly the way it was and exactly the way it could be. And I agreed with her because I pretty much practiced the same. It was in her living room in Provincetown over the best Portuguese soup ever that you should have if you do come to Provincetown, that she talked to me about how significant Herman Maril was, not just to the Provincetown community, but to the art community at large. And through many, many lunches, coming here to Baltimore, sitting with David and Nadja and really getting to know the family, I feel like I know Herman Maril even though I never met him. Luckily for me, they kept fantastic records, both videos, letters, books, pictures, all kinds of things that I really could immerse myself in to get to know who Herman Maril was. And it was in that same living room, probably over Portuguese soup, that we talked about Herman Maril turning 100 in 2008. And it was several years prior to that, and we had talked about doing a centennial exhibition at the museum, and we were thinking about who should curate that show. And Esta said, well, you should. And I said, but I don't really know that much about Herman Maril. She was, yes, you do, and you will do it. And I did. And one of the things I have to say that sticks with me most about Herman Maril is that not only was he an amazing artist and an exceptional teacher, but he was a brilliant philosopher. There are 4 points that Herman Maril that come across in his work that we should all live by, because if we did, our world would be splendid. A, it's not about you. It's about the bigger world and the universe in which we live in. B, no drama. Coming from a very dramatic community, I can appreciate that one. 3, less is more. And 4, we should protect the world in which we live. And those 4 simple yet powerful and poignant beliefs are really what structured Maril's work and how I perceive the creativity and the process. And part of what I'm going to do is not talk about a lot of biographical information because I want you to buy the book and actually read the excellent essays that are in that book. But I'm going to really go through and kind of show you a little bit of the progression of where Maril started as a very talented young artist in his 20s, some of the artists that inspired him, and where he moved, because throughout his career, he really did experience many of the major art historical movements: Cubism, modernism, abstract expressionism, but you can't coin one of those isms. So we have Marilism, because it was his own. And through his own philosophies and through his own talent, it's really what he devised and carried straight through his entire career. And that is, again, one of the reasons why he's such an individual, yet brilliant at the same time. So you can see a little bit, I lied, there is a little bit of historical information in here. But one of the things that, and I learned a lot of this through Esta too, is that he went to to pursue a career. He wanted to pursue a career in arts, but his parents wanted him to become an engineer, so he did take classes at night. That was the deal, but he was able to finish his degree and then move on to become a full-time artist. He was one of the first artists that was involved with the Works Project the Public Works Art Project, and I love this quote right here. If you're going to starve as an accountant, you might as well starve as a painter. It's a lot more fun. And for, like I said, for someone who's in the process of doing budgets, I really wish I could paint, but I can't. So anyways, Duncan Phillips of the Phillips Collection actually discovered Herman Maril in Chatham, which is a town not so far from Provincetown. Maril had been in Chatham that summer, and Duncan Phillips was staying at the Chatham Bars Inn, which is a very nice resort, and he wanted to see who the artist was working down the street in a barn, and it happened to be Herman Maril. Luckily for Herman Maril, that was Duncan Phillips of the Phillips Collection, and he met him in 1932. After a showing at the Phillips led to a major commission for Herman Maril of Baltimore waterfront right here. And it was on view at the Corcoran and at MoMA. And the wonderful picture that's actually in the gallery right now was in the World's Fair as well. And I think I have an image of that coming up. But one of the things that we love about Herman Maril is that even though he was an artist during the Depression, he was concerned with what was happening around him. He was concerned with his surroundings. But you'll notice in this image by Grant Wood that there's a lot of detail. Even though they don't look very enthusiastic, most American Depression artists were concerned with what was happening in their own communities, very emotional. But Maril, even though he was concerned with these same things, projected them in a different way. In 1936, he started teaching in the Cummington School. Chaim Gross was a major Provincetown artist who became a good friend of Maril's as well, and teaching became a big part of what he did. And as someone who also teaches, that was another affinity I had to Herman Maril about how he was very specific about teaching and making art, and really those were the two main things. And having been here for 30 years in this institution, you're very lucky to have somebody like that who can make that type of commitment. Early influences, the Italian Renaissance painters. This middle painting is a self-portrait that Maril did when he was 20 years old. Now, a 20-year-old artist doing something like that, incredibly prolific. If you look at the background and the landscape, that's very typical of the Italian Renaissance painters, the staff, the pose. This is Giotto on the left and Piero della Francesca on the right. You can see St. Sebastian here, you can see the staff, and here you can see the landscape in the background. So clearly he was looking at the Italian Renaissance artists, and why wouldn't you? That's a really good place to start. He was very influenced by Cézanne. This is a Cézanne on the left. This is a Herman Maril on the right. That's from 1930. So it's truly early on in his career. Not only was he looking at the masters, but he was really creating work that was significant and well done. Picasso on the left, Maril on the right. That's a picture also from the 30s. And you can see that he's actually moving into a more cubist kind of aspect as he's going forward. And in the 20s and 30s, when Cubism was becoming very, very prominent, Maril's technical competence was evolving as well. He was looking at the way that works were spread on the picture plane, the freedom of seeing objects abstracted, yet you still know what they are. And so moving through the Cubist movement in the 20s and 30s, there are two images by Maril, almost having a surrealist feel as well. He was experimenting in this genre, but he was definitely to move forward into looking at other artists and other work. This is work of Stuart Davis. Stuart Davis happened to be in Provincetown. He's not known as a Provincetown artist per se, but he definitely was there, as was Marston Hartley and several other major American painters. Some of Maril's contemporaries were Franz Klein on the left and Mark Rothko on the right. Rothko just happened to be the Maril's next-door neighbor, too, living in Provincetown. And you can sit in the rocking chair if you actually go to the house in Baltimore. But these artists, major artists in the American movement, both friends of Maril's, yet these artists, and this is just my opinion, much more concerned with the commercialized, going to New York, doing the gallery thing. Herman Maril was very much about teaching and going to Provincetown. Priorities, had them straight. Not that they're not great artists, believe me, I love them all. Milton Avery, again, a good friend of Maril's, several beautiful Averys in our collection, and they were both colleagues and friends in Provincetown. The 50s was quite an exuberant time for American artists, especially with abstract expressionist movement coming in. And these are another example of Carl Knaths, who was a Provincetown artist, also work in the Phillips, a number of works in the Phillips collection by Knaths, who was also a good colleague and friend of Herman Maril. This picture just happens to be in the PAM collection as well. Painting the sea, obviously a very common theme back from the 1890s with this Bodin here and a Winslow Homer. The sea was definitely one of Herman Maril's favorite things to paint, in addition to domestic scenes, his family, things that were real, things that were happening around him. But for those of you who haven't been to Provincetown before, you would understand it the minute you drove over the hill, because when you see this 3-square-mile peninsula surrounded by water, there's no way that you wouldn't be attracted to the light and what happens to be there. And I was purposely didn't put any pictures of Provincetown in there so you'd be forced to come down and see it yourself. The middle years between 1940 and 59, 1948 is when Herman married Esther Cook, and they started coming to Provincetown regularly and acquired their home in 1958. The paintings became looser and freer in their form and brushwork. You can see that there are not any really lines major outlining lines that separate things. It was kind of, the work had its own freedom. It didn't have to have all of the details in there because you know what they are, but he just freed himself from having to have that responsibility. Like, for example, the power lines. You know that those are power lines. You know the wires go across, but he didn't believe that was necessary for you to get that, which I love. And I love the minimalism of his work. I love that he was painting everyday scenes, yet he was using a style that became really his own. This is another example, same idea, beautiful picture, but industrial with a crane here. And he definitely was looking at things that were happening in the world at that time and expressing them in a way that others were not. The later years, 1960 to 86, you happen to have one of the most fantastic pictures in that gallery of the skaters. We had that in our exhibition. It's not only brilliant, and this is another little picture, but you know that they're figures, you understand that, but you don't need to see them with their full face and their expressions. The deceptive simplicity of what Herman Maril did was one of the most, I think, wonderful pieces of his work. Stark brushstrokes, and that's the other thing that you really need to go look at the paintings, because the texture, the brushstrokes, what type of whether he was using casein or gouache or oil on paper or on canvas, the texture plays a huge role in what he was doing, and harmony becomes very, very evident in the pictures as well. This is one of my favorite pieces of the chair in the living room. I love that he would use purples and yellows. He was using a palette that not a lot of other artists were using, and one of the things I remember reading about him is that he said you should never have more than 5 colors on your palette, because if you do, you're just going to make brown. Okay? There you go. Perfect example. Again, looking at the later years, you see the freeness, you see that of the porch, beautiful picture, that you know the horizon line is there, you know that here's a street with figures, yet they're not screaming in your face. It's just so subtle, and that's the beauty of it, really, I think, is what makes these so captivating. As many of you heard already today, and you can see in the bio in the book, he has many accolades, work is in many important collections, Academy of Arts and Letters. These are some examples of some of his wonderful paintings that included fishermen, horses, chickens, musical instruments. His musical instrument series is really just outrageous. The life jacket here, and for those of us who live by the sea, you know that those things are really essential, but they're things that you would probably pass by on the hook hanging there that you wouldn't even pay attention to. These are the types of things that Herman Maril brought out in his paintings, or things that you really wouldn't think twice about looking at, and that's why the subtlety of them is amazing and beautiful. I selfishly included some of the installation shots of the show at PAM that we did back in 2008, and this wall right in front here is a big glass facade. So when you walked in from the street, you would see the skaters, which is out there, the chair, and then this picture is called Dialogue at 5. Now, I guess 5 o'clock is typically cocktail hour. Well, 5 o'clock cocktail hour happens all the time in Provincetown, but the first picture that you walk into, you see this cocktail party happening here, and you could literally walk into that painting. People were so absorbed with what was happening in this picture in this whole front room that the attendance to the show was one of the highest we ever had at the museum. And so the front room here really showed you this free and loose style, kind of really knocked your socks off first, and then you went around the space, and we showed how the work progressed from this cubist style that he was moving to. This is the picture that was in the World's Fair. It moved along to show some of the industrial pieces in that middle 50s period. And then this is another one that you have here in the back room as well. Or no, I'm sorry, this one here. And we showed some of the domestic scenes. You would lots of times see a black cat typically, dogs, children, domestic scenes, family. And so we moved again into the room, and then you would see the pictures, the clothesline pictures I just absolutely love of him, of the person hanging the sheets out to dry, to sitting at the Red Inn, which is a fabulous restaurant that looks over the water in Provincetown. But because not only we could relate to these pictures, but they really took it one step forward, and the show was in our whole new wing that we built several years ago, but the flow of the work really carried you through the room so that you would continue to move around, and we just had so many people come back and look at the work and really be attracted to it because they could relate to these scenes. Everybody has seen somebody hanging out white sheets on their clothesline, sitting having dinner, somebody playing baseball, a boat coming into the shore, and the fact that he made these everyday topics seem just so much more special and beautiful is one of the reasons why I was so happy that I agreed when Esta told me I should do this project. So I want to thank Esta. I want to thank Herman Maril. I think that had I gotten to know him in person, I don't know if I could respect him more than I already do through his wife and his children and his family who have taken me under their wing and have allowed me access to studios and tons and tons of artwork, and have made me someone who has taken a particular interest in this work, which I will hopefully continue to do. Well, I know I will. And I congratulate all of you for having his name affiliated with your institution, because naming opportunities are key. And did you get that? Yeah. And having Herman Maril's name affiliated with your institution, in my opinion, is a huge coup, and I hope that in the future we'll do that in Provincetown as well. But congratulations to all of you for doing this and for having a spectacular institution. Making arts a huge part of your institution is what's going to help the future. So thank you all of you for listening to me blab about this, because it's a subject that I could continue to talk about forever and ever, but we'll move on because I know there's some more activities planned to happen. So thank you for listening to me. I really, really appreciate your time. Thank you.